So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, a refined and the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzaielic lineage. So then, we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then 61st chapter of Yirmiyahu, then we understand the cities then returning. We understand then the spring feast, the autumn feast, linked with Yirmiyahu chapter 1:8. As we understand in the Hebraic understanding or the Eastern understanding, there are no numbers or verses of any kind. We have to understand then the content and the context related then mostly with the Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, and then obviously reading from Hebrews, where then you find that in the instructions is then the shadow prophetic events yet coming, mostly related with the autumn feast. So then as we read these prophecies, we find then simultaneously from Yirmiyahu then and Daniel explanations regarding then the time of the restoration period where we are at. And there are some areas very peculiar but secular. Yirmiyahu then explained many of these areas during the time of his service, and then Daniel also explained them, mostly related with the 11th chapter, where you find then the nations, mostly then the kingdom of the east, north, and south, doing their work. But not only this, the importance of understanding then these areas related with the new trades system. Let's then evaluate once again the first son of Ibrahim, where he was then obviously a king, King Ishmael. Then later, much later, then the second son was born, and then became tabernacling. Let's then understand some of the nations involved with this new type of a system. As it was explained before, Brazil then is holding in July of this year. They had previously made these visit for this month, but then China requested a postponement of this period of time from March then to July. So then obviously the other countries, they had adjusted themselves. So then we are set for July of this year for the BRICS visit, and also other nations are adjusting themselves, as Brazil, for instance, in South America is lining up with this BRICS system. Then Brazil has started 185 times 6 digits of USDs of a new underwater cable, a submarine cable linking then Fortaleza. It's a place northeast of Brazil, then linking up directly with Lisbon in Portugal. Not only this, but then some time ago, very recently, the last 48 hours, came out also some information on British newspaper Reuters, extremely reliable. Then we found out that the OI company, it is then a mobile telephone company and also internet signal related, then they are joining up also with a Portuguese company and merging with them. Let's then understand the importance of the imperial power of this time. As we are then reading these information, It's not happenstance reading these and then observing the leaning towards the government from a more stable situation. Brazil at this moment is going through a period where then huge adjustments must be made. There are areas, for instance, of the car industry, petroleum industry, and adjustments also in the government, because the government, unfortunately, they could not make the lean adjustments as the people were expecting from them, and then the government became very big. But Brazil is improving. The services are improving, and believe it or not, the police force is also improving very greatly. As yesterday, then after coming from work, it was a very unique police car, and not very usual for this part of the country, but it was a vehicle very special, made for special forces, where then a person would never imagine the police would come out of this vehicle, but it was very inconspicuous, yet was very strong. But as we read then the nations joining, and then this new submarine cable related precisely with the new system, let's try to understand then what this means. You have then China, the Soviet Union, South Africa, India, and then Brazil joining up in this new venture. There is a new banking system coming for the BRICS, and then the joining of the Brazilian government with the Portuguese government. There is a leaning towards the imperial power of the past. What this translates simply is a higher form of respect. Unfortunately, the government at the moment, there are so many politicians that they should improve themselves, and then providing greater services for the people. And sometimes situations they arise, and then they become introverted. An introverted government is very dangerous, because it has a tendency of expanding itself without evaluating the true, real industry output, and then a nation becomes imbalanced. But let's try then understand another factor related with this. In Brazil, for instance, the car industry is going through a situation of a very probable pile-up. And then the petroleum industry must be also improved, more refineries, so then the people can have fuel in abundance for a reasonable price. These should take place more often, as in Brazil there is a big lack of media, decent, precise, and very stern media, because this country has lots of potential, and truly the services are improving, though the country is going through a very rough situation and tough times. And then when you request services, most of the time you are then treated very properly. It's a huge relief, because as then people becoming more trusting upon each other, trusting one another, and doing what's proper, not trying to make every cent you can ever get, but then you begin to give to other people. As people do this, then the level of trust increases, and then improves the country. As then the new system coming very shortly, as we understand, There are many other factors related with these computerized trade investments, and then helping other people becoming aware of the importance of a computer with a great capability. For instance, working and put aside money, so when the time comes you have a fast computer, and then later people will get a special line of 100 megabytes of signal, and this would be the signal used in banks when they make their own transactions. It's fast, reliable, and simple. In Brazil, yet it's not very popular using internet as bank. The country is much more popular. In Brazil isn't yet. But people are becoming more aware of the importance of training this system, training these ins and outs of these details, and then do the work, because the new system is coming. China, very wisely, for many years, they've known the computer ever since came out, that these computers should and are for the benefit of the people. Then, what the computer then provides, it is very exact. So then, governments, when they are doing their work, every time they are printing money and placing this money aside for certain tasks, then each time there is money placed aside for a task, comes out then a transaction number. So every time there is money taken from the government, it is always covered with an ID or then a transaction ID. And these must be recorded in the system, so they can get the best results of a budget and try avoid as much as they can not to print out money behind the system, but having always the money tracked by the system. At first might be troublesome. As a person becomes more acquainted with the systems and tasks and then categorizations of these, then they become in a sense of a higher country. Part of it is psychological, but as you train yourself with these new systems, as you can understand its ins and outs, when you truly make yourself available for these, you begin having a sense of what the world is like very shortly. So then, there was then in New Zealand some time ago, about a year ago, Mr. Joyce. He was explaining then during an interview, Stephen Joyce was giving some of the understandings of the new system, but during his time he was very involved with the Eastern system, and they were adapting this Eastern system to their very own. So his conversation was extremely educational. Let's then try establishing these areas of Daniel and what went on. The 12th chapter, for instance, speaks then, those went to the dust and shall return. It's one of them. then speaks of the land, speaks of reproach, and explains of these factors such as China, later becoming then the exactor, also related with precision of China. And then comes the overflow. And so many of these understandings are always related with trade amongst the nations. I have a lot to study yet, and a lot of it must be cleaned up because they are dirty. So then, we have US in trouble also with their own economy, and they have some troubles with the snow and some works of the nature. Then we find areas, many other areas related with the taxation, very important. Proper taxation to 10%. And then understanding the nations relating with each other. But most importantly, of each of these, the Soviet Union then comes very strongly, does a portion of it, and then does more. Very interesting. But then, in the other chapter, we find then Indian words of Daniel. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up in a sense, because as nations they are trying to relate each other with the new system. At times when we read sections, sometimes they don't align each other very precisely, but then if you make an alignment in the other way, then you find from the instructions and then the feasts and the animals and their doings, then they return. So these points, they must be talked over and have more time to speak of them later. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.